Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari,
Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunja Bihari,
Jaya Govinda Vallabha, Giridhari,
Govinda Vallabha, Giridhari,
Suranandana Braja Janarandana, sometimes we forget what it actually means. Krishna is the lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Vraja and the holder of the great hill named Govardhana. He is the beloved son of Mother Yasoda, the delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja, and he wanders in the forest along the banks of the river Jamuna. And there was one time in Michael when I was there, and Sri Prabhupada was singing Jaya and he went into a ecstatic trance. And that was the first time we've really seen this happen to Sri Prabhupada. He was always very, he kept those transcendental ecstasies very much in check. And he was singing Jaya and all of a sudden he just stopped. And he was completely in samadhi. And we were all looking at each other going, what's happened, what's happened? Prabhupada came, we couldn't figure out what it was. And then, I think it was Sansabuddha, he was standing behind Prabhupada and he started to chant Hare Krishna. And then Prabhupada came out of that trance. And I can't remember if he continued the class or if he just got up with my memory's fuzzy on that. And afterwards there was quite a debate between the God brothers. Why did you disturb Sri Prabhupada in his, ecstatic mood? And then Sansabuddha was like, well, no, I think I did the right thing, chanting Hare Krishna and bringing Prabhupada out of it. So it's very interesting. So whenever I hear Jai Radha, I always think of that. I think of Prabhupada having sung that beautiful bhajan and that very ecstatic, very unusual chorus. Nashta Praishu Bhajeshu Nicham Bhagavad Sera Bhavate Upanashloke Bhakti Bhakti Nashtiti. A regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam. Anyone is out there floating around, please come in. And by rendering the service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost practically destroyed. It's almost completely destroyed. And loving service and personality Godhead, whose praise for transcendental souls is established as an irrevocable fact on the reality of Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam. It's been a while since I've given a class. I'm very much looking forward to the opportunity of service in this way. Seek your blessings that I'll be able to speak something of some value. So we're studying 3:20:25.
Sa upavraja varadam prapanati haram harim anugrahaya bhaktanam anurupatma darshanam. Sa upavraja varadam prapanati haram harim anugrahaya bhaktanam anurupatma darshanam. Sa upavraja varadam anugrahaya bhaktanam Sarupa Vrajya Varadam Prapanati Haram Harim Anugrahaya Bhaktanam Anurupatma Darshanam. Sa Upavrajya Vadanam Prapanati Haram Harim Anugrahaya Bhaktanam Anurupatma Darshanam. Saupavraja Varadam Prapanati Haram Harim Anugrahaya Bhaktanam Anurupatma Darshanam. Thank you. Sa, Lord Brahma, Upavrajya, approaching, Varadam, the bestower of all boons, Prapanna, of those taking shelter at his lotus feet, Arti, distress, Haram, who dispels, Harim, Lord Sri Hari, Anugrahaya, for showing mercy, Bhaktanam, to his devotees, Anurupa, in suitable forms, Atma Darshanam, who manifests himself. Translation: He approached the personality of Godhead, who bestows all boons and who dispels the agony of his devotees and those who take shelter of his lotus feet. He manifests his innumerable transcendental forms for the satisfaction of his devotees. Please repeat after me. He approached the personality of Godhead, who bestows all boons and who dispels the agony of his devotees and of those who take shelter of his lotus feet. He manifests his innumerable transcendental forms for the satisfaction of his devotees. Purport. Here the words Bhaktanam Anurupatma Darshanam mean that the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests his multi-forms according to the desires of the devotees. For example, Hanumanji Rajarangaji wanted to see the form of the Lord as the personality of Godhead Ramachandra, whereas other Vaishnavas want to see the form of Radha Krishna, and still other devotees want to see the Lord in the form of Lakshmi Narayan. The Mayavadi philosophers think that although these forms are assumed by the Lord, just as the devotees desire to see him, actually he is impersonal. From Brahma Samhita, however, we can understand that this is not so, for the Lord has multi-forms. It is said in the Brahma Samhita, Advaitam Achyutam. The Lord does not appear before the devotee because of the Lord's imagination. Brahma Samhita further explains that the Lord has innumerable forms. Ramadi Mutishu Kala Niyamena Tishtan. He exists in millions and millions of forms. There are 8,400,000 species of living entities, but the incarnations of the Supreme Lord are innumerable. In the Bhagavatam, it is stated that as the waves in the sea cannot be counted but appear and disappear continually, the incarnations and forms of the Lord are innumerable. A devotee is attached to a particular form, and it is that form which he worships. We have just described the first appearance of the boar within this universe. There are innumerable universes, and somewhere or other the boar form is now existing. All the forms of the Lord are eternal. It is the devotee's inclination to worship a particular form, and he engages in devotional service to that form. In a verse in the Ramayana, Hanuman, the great devotee of Rama, said, I know that there is no difference between the Sita, Ram, and Lakshmi Narayan forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but nevertheless, the form of Rama and Sita has absorbed my affection and love. Therefore, I want to see the Lord in the forms of Rama and Sita. Similarly, Gaudiya Vaishnava loves the forms of Radha and Krishna and Rukmini at Dwarka. The words Bhaktanam Anurupatma Darshanam mean that the Lord is always pleased to favour the devotee in the particular form in which the devotee wants to worship and render service unto him. In this verse, it is stated that Brahma approached Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This form of the Lord is Kshirodaksha Vishnu. Whenever there is some trouble and Brahma has to approach the Lord, he can approach Kshirodaksha Vishnu. And it is the grace of the Lord that whenever Brahma approaches about disturbances in the universe, the Lord gives him relief in so many ways. Translation again. He approached the personality of Godhead who bestows all boons and who dispels the agony of his devotees and of those who take shelter of his lotus feet. He manifests his innumerable transcendental forms for the satisfaction of his devotees. Such an amazing purport, that one. So, welcome everyone to today's reading. Continuing the conversations between Maitreya and Vidura. So we've been reading a lot about some wonderful topics. And in verse 5 of this chapter, we learnt that hearing of such narrations as the conversations between Vidura and Maitreya is exactly like bathing in the Ganges. It can free one from all sinful reactions. Got the right one up there. So you can see here there's the Holy River right near the TOVP, and you can see Prabhupada's Samadhi there in the distance, Prabhupada's Pushpa Samadhi. So in verse 5 of this chapter, we learnt that hearing of such conversations between Vidura and Maitreya is just like bathing in the Ganges. It dispels all of our anxieties, our distresses, and it frees one from all sinful reaction. And when we come to, do our reading of Srimad Bhagavatam, or we come and sit in the class of Srimad Bhagavatam, we always feel very relieved, at least I do, feel very relieved from all of our concerns and sufferings. So Prabhupada set up this morning program very, very nicely so that we can be constantly in touch with the Lord. So Prabhupada explains that the Ganga is one of the 7 holy rivers in India. And in Anshulila, Prabhupada says this. This is Adi Lila 941. India has many sacred rivers such as the Ganges, Jamuna, Narmada, Kaveri, and Krishna. And simply by bathing in these rivers, people are liberated and become Krishna conscious. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, Bharata Bhumite Hoila Manashagram Janma Yara Janma Sakara Kari Kara Para Upakara. So when you read that purport, Prabhupada's actually giving very strong instructions to those who've been fortunate enough to have been born in the Dham. Born in Bharatvarsha in India. And Prabhupada says that one who has taken birth in the land of Bharatabhumi, India, should take full advantage of his birth. He should become completely well versed in the knowledge of the Vedas and spiritual culture, and should distribute the experience of Krishna consciousness all over the world. People all over the world are madly engaged in sense gratification, and this way spoiling their human lives, with the risk that in the next life they may become animals or less. Human society should be saved from such risky civilization and the danger of animalism by awakening to God consciousness, Krishna consciousness. The Krishna consciousness movement has been started for that purpose. Therefore, unbiased men of the highest echelon should study the principles of the Krishna consciousness movement and fully cooperate with this movement to save human society. So when we have the opportunity of visiting holy places such as Mayapur, Vrindavan, Jagannath Puri, so many wonderful holy places, alongside bathing these holy rivers, and it's interesting, I lived in Mayapur for a very long time and didn't bathe in the Ganges that much. And they say that those who live by the Ganges don't often bathe in it unless they have no other way of bathing. But it's really important that when we go to the Dham, we take regular Ganga shnans, or bathing in the Ganga. And not only that, but when we come out of the Ganges, we're removed from our sinful reactions. But just like the elephant goes in to bathe, he comes out nice and, crispy clean. And then what does he do? Yes, he throws dust all over himself again. So that's what happens to us. We bathe in the Ganga, but we come out, we've still got the seeds of desire in our hearts, and they fructify. So it's really important that when we go to the holy places, we actually hear from the great sages. So once again, regularly attending Bhagavatam class and keeping a good solid program when you go to Mayapur, it's very important. Any of you haven't been to Mayapur yet? I'd say 3 of you. 3. You're in for a great treat. And try and do that. Bathe in the holy river, dressed appropriately, and then go to all of the classes. And if you happen to be there during a festival, try and become involved in any of the seminars there. So in recent verses, and let's look at verse 17, because I always like to go back a little bit to see what we've been talking about. In verse 16, it explains, Brahma was the first living entity, and he was empowered by the Supreme Lord to act in the charge of the mode of passion. And this morning I was just listening to a beautiful lecture by Prabhupada about Vyas Puja and the importance of Vyas Puja. And Prabhupada was saying that Krishna initiated Lord Brahma. So did he sit down there and do a fire yagya and give him his beads? No, he initiated him within his heart. So he's actually the disciple of Krishna himself directly. And the purport continues, therefore he was and he was empowered by the Supreme Lord to act in charge of the mode of passion. Therefore he was given the required intelligence, which is so powerful and extensive that he is almost independent of the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Note the almost. He's still under the control. He's almost independent. Yet Lord Brahma, even Lord Brahma with that vast intelligence, he's also subject to make mistakes. He desired his daughter, which was a really, terrible sin. He stole the cowherd boys. I couldn't think of any other mistakes Lord Brahma had made. Ramai Maharaj, can you think of any? Those two leap to my mind. They're the most famous. So we're not independent from the Lord, but His parts and parcels. He's Swamsa, He's complete, and we're Vibhanamsa. We are small. We are classified. Would someone mind getting me a drink of water? Thank you. And Vibhanamsa, that means we're Jiva Tattva. And another word for our energy is called Tatashta Shakti. And Tatashta means marginal. So just like where you have the ocean, and then you have the seashore, the sand that's right near the ocean. When the tides come, it will cover that part of the shore, and then the tide goes and it will uncover it. So we're like that, Tatashta Shakti. We're sometimes covered over and then sometimes uncovered, depending on our spiritual advancement, etc. So we're qualitatively the same as Krishna, but not quantitatively. So we have a lot of the attributes, but in little minuscule amounts. So Brahma was given the intelligence to create, and similarly, Krishna gives us the creative energy and intelligence. And we have to be really aware that we are not the creator or the genesis of those brilliant creative thoughts. If we think like that, then we're simply, we're borrowed plumes. So just here, I think we have a crow up there, and he's nicked some feathers off the peacock, and he's thinking, oh, I'm a peacock. So when we think that, oh, I've achieved this, or that was a great idea I had, or I did this, or I did that, we're simply being foolish. And we need to try and develop that understanding that whatever we can create or think of, or the aspirations and that we may have, or if we inspire other people, it's not coming from us. It's actually coming from Krishna. And if we don't think like that, if we think, wow, that was a really cool idea I had, then we're being very foolish, because we can't even move our arms or blink our eyes without the demigod, demigods controlling us. And in First Canto, chapter 15, verse 21, I love this verse. One should not be puffed up by borrowed plumes. All energies and powers are derived from the Supreme Source, Lord Krishna, and they act as long as He desires and cease to function as soon as He withdraws. So with this in mind, we can humbly accept that Lord Brahma is empowered by the Lord, and any talents, ideas, skills, or whatever that we may have are just borrowed from the Lord. We can't claim ownership of our prowess. And as I said before, even without the demigod's permission, we can't blink, we can't move, we can't do anything, let alone the Lord. But rather, we should acknowledge that we have borrowed plumes, and the source is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of our ingenuity, our intelligence, our creativity. And that way we can remain humble, because humility is such a key part of our Krishna conscious life. If someone has said to me, Krsnarupa, what do you think would be the two most important things, apart from following the sadhana and devotional practices? One is to remain humble, and the second is not to commit offences against devotees. Because whenever we do that, sometimes we commit offences inadvertently, not deliberately, but even if it's an inadvertent offence, you're still hurting that person. So it's really wise for us to be thinking, okay, is my behaviour going to hurt anyone's feelings? Really try not to be offensive towards devotees. And in Kali Yuga, of course, we're very fortunate in that we do not have karma for what we think. But as you probably read in Bhagavad Gita Jayanta yesterday, going through the verses, that there's thinking, feeling and willing. So if we think negative thoughts and we think, okay, I can think whatever I like, my mind can just, say all the things it wants to say about a particular person or a particular institution or whatever. But that then will become feeling, and then willing will be doing. So it's really good to control the mind, and when we're thinking like that, pull it back in order and say, no, this is not good thinking. And we heard that Lord Brahma, the previous verse, had to flee from the Rakshas and the Yakshas, and those demons were in pursuit of Lord Brahma. And so here he is in verse 25, the verse we're reading today. He's approaching the Lord, begging for protection. Oh, my dear Lord, please help me. Begging protection from these sinful demons who are all after him. And we'll read about that more in the subsequent verses. So, all the different forms the Lord takes is not generated from imagination, Prabhupada explains in the purport. Some of them are described in great detail in the pages of Bhagavatam, like Shringadev, Varaha, all those different major incarnations. But we know that the Lord, as Prabhupada explained in the purport, also incarnates in all species of life. That's often led me very puzzled. Okay, so if he appears in all species of life, does that mean the Lord appears as a cockroach or as a mosquito? I have no idea. I can't speculate on that. But Prabhupada explains that he does appear in all species of life. And we know he appears as a fish and the tortoise and the boar. And these, Prabhupada explains that all these different forms are not generated from a devotee's imagination, but the forms are very prescribed and very delineated very carefully in the scriptures. So we don't go around thinking, oh, well, I'd really like to worship the Lord in the form of half this or half that. That's completely bogus and speculative. So we worship the Lord in the different forms that are prescribed in Srimad Bhagavatam. So the verse we are reading today describes the three aspects of the Lord. Can anyone think of the three things? Remember the three things that translation mentioned? It mentions the Supreme Personality of Godhead bestows all boons to the devotees. He fulfills all desires, if they're not in contradiction to our devotional principles, and he gives great boons, he gives benedictions. And then the other part is he dispels the agony of his devotees and of those who take shelter of his lotus feet. So he's so merciful that when we're suffering, and we do suffer in this material world, that we can take shelter of Krishna and he will dispel our agony. And then the third point was he manifests the transcendental forms of the Lord for the satisfaction of his devotees. How kind is Krishna that he's always thinking how to please his devotees. He's always thinking. He's not a taker, but he's a giver. And just as we all have our individual tastes and favourite forms of the Lord, Krishna is so kind that he seeks to satisfy the devotee's individual tastes. And that's how much he loves us. That's how much he loves his children. And there was a nice pastime I heard about Prabhupada recently, and it was in a class by Bhadra Narayan Maharaj. And he was saying, this was during Nanda Kumar Das's time as a servant of Srila Prabhupada, and Nanda Kumar left us a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So we can all say prayer for him, that he's now with Srila Prabhupada. But as his servant, he would take up, the snacks or lunches and prasadam for Prabhupada. And this one day, a devotee had made cookies and decorated them with icing. So when Nanda Kumar brought down the plate, and there was always lots of devotees waiting to be able to get the maha, because Prabhupada usually left some remnants, and he noticed that all the icing had been licked off. Prabhupada had licked the icing, but left the cookies. So when I heard about that, I was thinking, how fortunate would those devotees have been who to eat the remnants of the cookies that Prabhupada had licked. They would have got the Maha nectar from Srila Prabhupada's lotus mouth. And then Nanda Kumar said to Prabhupada, well, what do you didn't like the cookies? And Prabhupada said, we all have our individual tastes. So we like certain things, we like sweet, we like sour, all different things, but we also have our much loved form of the Lord. And for Brahma, Gaudiya, Vaishnavas, it's in the form of Radha and Krishna. And then we have the example of Murari Gupta. Now, he appeared in Chaitanya Lila, and he was very, very attached to Lord Ramachandra, very attached. And Lord Chaitanya tested his attachment to his Ishtadev, his Ramachandra. And he said to him, Murari, just worship Krishna and take shelter of him. Nothing but his service can satisfy the mind. So, of course, Murari Gupta, he wanted to, he was inclined, of course, to worship of Krishna. But the thought of losing Lord Ramachandra's association devastated him. So he was crying all night. I'll have to give up my life. I'll have to give up this body. Mahaprabhu's given me this instruction to worship Radha and Krishna, but I'm so attached to the form of Lord Ramachandra, I don't know what to do. So after crying all night, Murari approached Lord Chaitanya and he said, what should I do? I've sold my head to the lotus feet of Ramachandra. I love that. I've sold my head to the lotus feet of Ramachandra. But if I break your order to worship Lord Sri Krishna, then what can I do? And Mahaprabhu, what did he do? He smiled. And he said, oh, glories to Murari Gupta. You're so fixed in your worship that even my request couldn't turn your mind. This is exactly the type of love and affection the servitor must have for the lotus feet of the Lord. Even if the Lord wants separation, a devotee cannot abandon the shelter of his lotus feet. Just to test your firm faith in your Lord, I repeatedly ask you to change your worship from Lord Ram to Lord Krishna. Congratulating Murari Gupta, he continued, you are the incarnation of Hanuman, the eternal servant of Lord Ram. Therefore, why should you give up your worship of Lord Ram? And it's a very, very beautiful pastime. So in the part of the translation, we also read how he dispels the agony of devotees and those who have taken shelter of his lotus feet. And in the class I was listening to recently, the devotee giving the class, he said he saw a billboard outside a church in America that said, what a friend we have in Jesus. And Krishna, he's the greatest friend. He's our greatest friend and well-wisher. And in 7.6.24, Prabhupada wrote this. One is expected to understand these three formulas of knowledge concerning the Supreme Lord. That he is the supreme enjoyer, that he is the proprietor of everything, and that he is the best well-wisher and friend of everyone. So we can feel totally confident that Krishna, above all else, is our well-wisher and our friend. And he induces us to perform devotional service, and then he sanctions that service. And in the class I was listening to early this morning, Prabhupada was saying exactly that he is the supreme friend and well-wisher. So we have no cause for alarm. Life is tough, and we all experience really, really tough circumstances. But if we can cling on to that Krishna is our supreme friend and ever well-wisher, that really helps us deal with those, to be expected trials and tribulations. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, a preacher should personally understand these truths and preach them to everyone. then there will be peace and tranquility all over the world. So you would have heard that beautiful saying, we take one step to Krishna, he takes 10 steps to us. I've also heard 100 steps to us. So he's there just waiting for us to turn to him. And any little endeavour on our part holds great rewards because Krishna responds. And, you probably have seen this in your own lives. And we go through all the trials and traumas. But if we remember that Krishna is there to guide us, just as a knife is sharpened by a stone, that's how you sharpen knives. You have the whetting knife, the sharp stone, and goes at speed and you sharpen your knife. And so when we encounter difficulties, ideally we become more focused on our service and we pray harder and we pray deeper. So we're living in a world where the vast number of people are very lonely and they're suffering. And although we may have our own trials and tribulations, but we have faith that Krishna's there, and we can see how that happens so many times. And probably some of you have had that experience. And Bhadranarayan Maharaj was saying that he was driving and he somehow or other ended up in this huge pile-up. So he was like going in circles, hit one car, he hit two cars, he hit three cars. And when eventually his vehicle stopped and he climbed out, he was dressed in his, devotional attire, he climbed out unharmed. And this guy went running up to him and he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a Hare Krishna." He said, "Okay, I'm a believer from here on in." Because he was so shocked that he got out of there unharmed. Of course, it doesn't mean that, we're always going to be unharmed. And I know one devotee was driving back from Brisbane after giving a seminar, and she was feeling very tired. And she went into that microsleep, a bit like that big truck went into a microsleep on the Tweed Valley Way the other day. And someone had videoed it and put it on. They had a camera on their, I was going to say desktop, but on the dash. Thank you, the dashboard. And he videoed it. So this devotee also fell asleep. But what happened was all the, literally that far from hitting the metal railing on the side. It was 3-lane traffic. Everyone's going over 100 kilometres now, 110 kilometres. She was that far from hitting that, and all of a sudden, Radha Govardhana Dari appeared in her mind, and it woke her up with a start. She was so shocked that actually she saw Krishna, Radha and Krishna there. It was Radha Govardhana Dari, that she woke up and managed to, avoid the accident. So, it's really quite amazing how Krishna works. And in another incident, this devotee was in a really bad motorcycle accident. She was riding on a push bike in Mayapur along the very narrow Bhaktisiddhanta road. And this young guy riding a really big motorbike very fast decided that he would go on the wrong side of the road and overtake this vehicle that was obscuring the path. So he had no idea. And this Mataji's happily on her little push bike, and then all of a sudden she sees this very powerful big motorbike coming at speed, maybe between me and where you are, Tom. And then everything went in slow motion. But she was so overjoyed that she remembered Krishna. And she was shocked because it's not something that, she would normally do in times of, great stress. And she remembered Krishna and she thought, so this is how I die. And apart from very severe bruising and 2 broken ribs, she survived. But Krishna is there, and this devotee was explaining how all that morning, it would have been a wonderful day to actually leave her body, because she'd made these crocheted chodders for Radha Madhava. She took about 2 years to make all the crochet borders and everything. And she'd been praying to the deities, "Oh, my dear Lord, Radha Madhava, I'm leaving, tomorrow or the day after to go back to Australia. Please, if you like the chodders, would you wear them?" And then she was at Mangalati and she looked and the deities were wearing those chodders. And then she had another experience. It was all in the same day, and I hope I'm not boring you, but it's quite interesting. And she wanted to take some Maha jewellery back for Venugopal, who was about to leave his body. And Jananivas was very crowded. He'd given Bhagavatam class and was very hemmed in. And this lady thought, "Oh, look, I've got to leave. I can't wait to ask him." And all of a sudden, he just was coming down the steps of the Maha jewellery shop. And like seconds before, he was in the temple surrounded by devotees. It was quite miraculous how he just suddenly appeared. And then she said, "Oh, would you have some Maha jewellery that she could give to Venugopal?" So he said, "Yeah, come upstairs," and he gave some Maha sweet and Maha jewellery. And then, off this devotee went. And all the way back to her flat, she was thinking, somehow or other, what if something happens to me the day before I due to leave? And this devotee never thinks like that. But this was a really predominant thought in her mind. And it was the whole time, it was like the super soul saying, "Turn left, don't go straight, turn left." But she didn't listen. And that's when the collision hit. So when you hear that voice, it's like our intuition or super soul, you listen to it because it's very, very important. So, we have confidence that Prabhupada will be there at the time of our death. Krishna will be there at the time of our death. And Mukunda Datta is another great example of this. He was once forbidden, and this is from Adi Leela, he was once forbidden to enter the association of Lord Chaitanya because of his mixing with Mayavadi impersonalists. So he called all the devotees one after the other to bless them. But Mukunda Datta wasn't called. He was standing outside the door. And the devotees informed the Lord that Mukunda Datta was waiting outside. And the Lord replied, "I shall not soon be pleased with Mukunda Datta. For though he explains devotional service amongst devotees, he then goes to Mayavadis to hear from them the Yoga Vasishta Ramayana, which is full of Mayavad philosophy. For this I'm greatly displeased with him." And then Mukunda Datta, hearing the Lord speak like that, was exceedingly glad. And why was he exceedingly glad? Because the Lord didn't say, "I will never be pleased with Mukunda Datta." He said, "At some time I will be pleased with him." So he was overjoyed that, at some time, it might take me millions of births, but I'll get the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. But of course, when the Lord understood that Mukunda Datta had given up association with these Mayavadis, he was, for good, he was pleased. And he at once called to see Mukunda. Thus he delivered him from the association of the Mayavadis and gave him the association of pure devotees. So his depression was alleviated. And there's a very beautiful verse, I think I've got it up. Yeah. Very beautiful verse there that, it's nice to remember this, and if we can write it down and repeat it daily. "Dear Lord, we may not be able to remember your name, form and qualities due to stumbling, hunger, falling down, yawning, or being in a miserable disease condition at the time of death when there is high fever." Because Bhagavatam explains that the body has very, very, very high fever, then it plunges down to below zero, and then the soul leaves the body. "We therefore pray to you, O Lord, for you're very affectionate to your devotees. Please help us remember you and utter your holy names, attributes and activities which can dispel all the reactions of our sinful lives. So it's a very, very beautiful part there, that verse. So Krishna, because he's a supreme friend, he'll always be with us. We pray to him with sincerity and take shelter of him. In Bhagavad Gita 1:19, Prabhupada says that one who takes shelter of the Supreme Lord has nothing to fear, even in the midst of the greatest calamities. So even though we may be in danger, we may be suffering, we can just remember Krishna, then our destination is very auspicious and very wonderful. So our bodies and minds may suffer, but remembrance of the Lord will help us to put all of these things in perspective, just like the knife is being sharpened on the whetting stone. So when we get the sufferings and we're having a hard time, if we can look at it and think, okay, this is making me toughen up. This is giving me an opportunity to take shelter more and more of Krishna and more of his pure devotee. So just to recap, so we talked about the different points for this verse and the three aspects. So he bestows all boons, he relieves the agony of those who take shelter, and he manifests his innumerable transcendental incarnations for the satisfaction of his devotees. We talked about various preceding verses about Vidura and Maitreya. We talked about the holy Ganges River and how important it is to bathe in the Ganga and the holy places. And we spoke about Lord Brahma. And we talked about how Krishna induces and he sanctions. He induces a sincere soul to take up devotional service. And that was a point Prabhupada was making in this lecture this morning, that when Krishna sees the sincerity, he arranges things so you come in contact with Krishna consciousness. And in that same lecture, Prabhupada said, anyone who comes in contact with Krishna consciousness is no ordinary soul. So it was a very, very beautiful lecture. And I talked about Svamsa and Vibhanamsa, and we talked about Tatashta Shakti and the borrowed plumes. And can anyone, Tom, can you remember what Tatashta Shakti is? Something to do with the sea. The example. So Tatashta Shakti is the Jiva Tattva. So Tatashta is marginal, sometimes covered over, sometimes uncovered. Yeah. And we spoke about remembering the Lord at the time of death or when we were in danger, and we talked about Murari Gupta and Mukunda Datta. And I want to thank you very much for listening. And do you have any questions?
Thank you so much for class, Master G. That was beautiful. I wanted to ask your tips on discerning how to listen to the super soul, or when it really is just your mind.
Yes, it's a really good question, Monique. And we also want to be careful that, super soul told me I should, because that gives, opens the door of mental speculation. So you have to be very considered about it, and not, you're looking at all different kind of aspects. That I mentioned about that devotee having the, actually that devotee was me, by the way. I was the one who got hit by the motorbike. But it was so strong and occurred pretty much constantly. And so much so that I was thinking, wow, this is really where is this coming from? I'd better chant Hare Krishna. So as I was riding on my push bike, I was really loudly chanting. Not kirtan, just Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. I think that saved me. But it was a very strong thing. But I let my intellectual mind take over my intuitive mind, or my, Paramatma. So yeah, you want to be, one needs to be careful about not second guessing and thinking, oh yes, it's definitely Paramatma telling me. But when it's a very, very strong feeling, and you can consult with your seniors and say, look, I really feel I'm intuiting this so strongly, give me your opinion. Is this my mind, fooling around with me, or is there some strong message that I need to be listening to? Does that help at all?
Yeah, definitely. Do you think also that relationship with the super soul intuition, that would also take some time and practice to develop?
Yes. Definitely right.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely right. It's not something that, in 2 seconds all of a sudden we're, it takes some time and experience in Krishna consciousness to be able to figure out, But oftentimes it might be a small little voice and you're not sure what it is, whether it's your speculation or whether it's somehow rather Paramatma is trying to give you some sound advice, but you can ask some, senior devotee as well. Anything else?
Thank you for the class, Mataji.
Oh,
Extending on the question that Monique asked, like Krishna consciousness, it's kind of always understanding that Krishna is there. And if you were like fully Krishna conscious, then does that mean that you're always having this kind of communication with the super soul?
Well, the pure devotee does.
Yeah. So therefore...
But that's not a cheap thing.
No.
We can classify Srila Prabhupada as the pure devotee. He's like the great big pot of sweet rice, nectar pot of sweet rice. And one time I was in Prabhupada's room, and one devotee asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, does a pure devotee see Krishna everywhere? Do you see Krishna everywhere? And Prabhupada held out the palm of his hand, and he said, if there's a drop of water in the palm of, drop of water there, the pure devotee, he didn't say I, he said the pure devotee, but we know that it's Prabhupada. Prabhupada said the pure devotee, we see Krishna, Krishna's associates, and all the cows. So, yes, but that's not a cheap thing. That's, for the devotees in the Uttama Adhikari platform. We're little entities, somehow or other, by the mercy of Krishna. He's seen there's some sincerity there. Might have been through Ajnata Sukriti, just unknowing pious activity. We've been given this opportunity. And it's so rare. And Prabhupada said in that lecture I was referring to this morning, he said anyone who comes in contact with Krishna consciousness is not an ordinary soul. It's so rare. And that's why we should respect each other and all devotees, keeping in mind that this is an opportunity to create an idyllic, peaceful world, by keeping that in mind. But yeah, Prabhupada said we can become Krishna conscious in a second. I can't snap my fingers anymore because of arthritis, but like that. But it can also take many lifetimes. But like Mukunda Datta, he was excited. Sometime the Lord will be pleased with me. He didn't say he'll never be pleased with me. So it may not be this end of this life that we'll go back to Godhead. but we're definitely assured of it. We just have to stick to it. Might take a number of lifetimes, but we're there, we're on the path back home, back to Godhead. Okay.
Thank you.
Jai Hari Bol. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.